After leaving that apartment behind, I thought maybe the worst chapters of my life had already been written. But fear has a way of following you, even into places you believe are safe. That was what I learned when I moved into the small single-story house on the edge of town. It wasn't much, peeling paint on the porch, weeds pushing through cracks in the walkway, but it was cheap, and I told myself it would be different this time. No one knew me there. No one had reason to care. For months, it was quiet. I worked during the day, cooked dinner at night, and sometimes drove over to see my mom on weekends. The house was lonely, sure, but it was steady. And steady was something I hadn't had in a long time. For the first time in years, I convinced myself maybe I could live without constantly looking over my shoulder. That illusion shattered one Thursday night. It was close to midnight when the pounding started. Not a knock, not a polite tap, but fists slamming against the front door, hard enough to rattle the hinges. I jolted upright from the couch, my heart pounding. I grabbed the bat I still kept close, every muscle in my body tensed. The pounding didn't stop. Whoever it was, they weren't going away. I crept toward the window, peeking out through the blinds. A man stood on my porch, tall, his shoulders heaving with each strike against the door. His hair stuck out like he hadn't washed in days, his clothes rumpled, dirty. His mouth moved, shouting words I couldn't hear through the glass. Summoning every ounce of courage I had left, I cracked the door open just enough to shout back. "What do you want?" His head snapped toward me, eyes blazing. "This is my house," he screamed. "You don't belong here. You're trespassing." I froze. For a moment, I thought he was just drunk, maybe lost. But then his voice grew sharper, his words tumbling out fast. He started rattling off details about the house, things no stranger could know. He knew the bathroom door banged into the toilet if you swung it too far. He knew the back door only opened if you lifted it while turning the knob. He knew about the loose board in the hallway that creaked every time you stepped on it. My stomach dropped. How could he know those things? Before I could answer, he pulled a folder from under his arm and shoved it against the screen. Papers. A lease agreement with his name on it. Utility bills. Mail addressed to him at my address. My breath hitched as he pulled out his phone and began scrolling through photos. Photos of him inside the house. I couldn't look away. There he was, sitting on the same couch I had been sleeping on for months. Standing in the kitchen with a pot simmering on the stove. Even lying in the bed I had slept in the night before. "I told you," he snarled. "This is my house." The photos looked recent. Too recent. I felt the blood drain from my face as my grip on the bat tightened. My mouth opened, but no words came out. None of it made sense. I told him I was calling the police, not as a threat but because I didn't know what else to do. His expression shifted instantly. The anger melted away, replaced by something colder. He nodded, calm now, almost casual. "Fine," he said softly. "I'll wait." Then he turned, stepped off the porch, and disappeared into the darkness. When the police arrived, I spilled everything. The pounding, the lease, the photos. They listened, but their eyes betrayed them. They thought he was unstable, delusional. They promised to increase patrols, told me to talk to my landlord, and left. But their words didn't touch the dread clawing inside me. I called the landlord the next day, desperate for answers. He swore no one by that name had ever rented the house. He gave me the names of the previous tenants, and when I reached out to them, they were just as baffled. They had lived there for 3 years, never once encountering the man I described. So how did he know so much? How did he have documents? How did he have photos that looked so real? I tried to convince myself maybe they were forged, maybe he was playing some elaborate trick. But I couldn't erase the certainty in his eyes when he shouted at me. The way he looked at me like I was the intruder. For nights after, I barely slept. Every knock at the door made me jump. Every shadow outside the window stretched too long, lingered too heavy. I kept the bat close, the lights on, my nerves raw. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Because people don't show up at your door with that kind of proof unless they believe it. And belief can be more dangerous than anything else. I kept replaying that night over and over in my head. The pounding on the door, the folder pressed against the screen, the photographs that looked so natural it was like I was the one trespassing in his life. I could still hear his voice, raw and certain, declaring the house was his. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face again, sweaty, unshaven, furious, yet steady, like he truly believed what he said. The police hadn't taken it seriously. They had nodded, written down my words, and left me with hollow reassurances. The landlord had shaken his head, baffled but insistent that the man had never lived there. And the previous tenants had been just as confused. There were no gaps in the rental records, no hidden history. On paper, the man didn't exist. But my gut told me otherwise. For the next few nights, I lived in a haze of paranoia. I barely slept, jolting awake at the slightest noise. The house creaked like it always had, but now every sound felt amplified, sinister. I double-checked the locks, slid a chair under the doorknob, even nailed a piece of wood against the back door. It didn't matter. None of it made me feel safe. Because what unsettled me most wasn't that he might come back, it was that I believed he would. The first time I saw him again was a week later. I was closing the blinds in the living room when I caught a glimpse of movement near the edge of the yard. My stomach dropped as I squinted into the dark. There he was. Standing still, half hidden in the shadows, just watching. He didn't move, didn't speak, didn't even flinch when I locked eyes with him. He just stood there, as if daring me to come outside. I froze, my breath catching in my throat, before snapping the blind shut. My hands shook as I backed away, the bat clutched so tightly my knuckles turned white. I wanted to call the police, but what would I say? That someone had stood outside my yard? They would dismiss it again, the way they always did. Hours passed before I dared to peek again. He was gone. The yard was empty, silent, like nothing had ever been there. But I knew better. He had wanted me to see him. Days passed without incident, but the dread didn't fade. It only grew. I caught myself glancing out the window constantly, expecting to see him standing there again. I jumped at shadows, at the sound of a car passing, at the creak of the hallway floorboards. Sleep came in fragments, never lasting more than an hour or two before I startled awake, convinced someone was inside. Then came the break-in. It happened on a Tuesday. I came home from work, exhausted, my mind heavy with lack of sleep. The moment I opened the door, I knew. The smell hit me first, dust stirred into the air, mixed with something sharp, metallic. The living room was torn apart. Cushions slashed open, books pulled from the shelves, drawers emptied onto the floor. My stomach twisted as I stepped inside, my shoes crunching on shattered glass from a broken picture frame. I rushed through the house, my heart hammering, praying whoever had done it was gone. The kitchen was the same, cabinets yanked open, dishes shattered, food spilled across the floor. The bedroom made me stop cold. The mattress had been dragged halfway off the bed frame, blankets ripped apart, clothes tossed everywhere. And on the pillow where I slept every night was a photograph. Of him. The same man who had stood on my porch. Lying on my bed. His head on the same pillow I laid on every night, his eyes staring straight into the camera, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. I staggered back, bile rising in my throat. My knees felt weak as I grabbed the photo with trembling hands. He hadn't just broken in to destroy things. He had broken in to show me what he could do. To show me he could be in my most intimate space, where I was most vulnerable. I called the police again, shouting into the phone, desperate for them to understand this time. They came, they saw the damage, they saw the photo. Their faces hardened, but still, they couldn't give me answers. They told me to stay somewhere else for a few days while they investigated. But I knew what that meant. They had nothing. That night, I didn't go to my mom's. I couldn't risk him dragging her into it. Instead, I checked into a cheap motel on the other side of town. The bed was lumpy, the walls thin, but at least it wasn't that house. I lay awake on the stiff mattress, staring at the ceiling, wondering what kind of person wages a war like this. Someone who doesn't want money, doesn't want possessions, but wants ownership. Ownership of a place. Of a life. I went back to the house 2 days later, escorted by an officer. The damage was still there, untouched. But something new waited for me in the kitchen. A piece of paper, folded neatly, sitting in the middle of the table. My hands shook as I unfolded it. It was a photocopy of that same lease agreement he had shown me the first night. His name printed clearly, the address unmistakable. But at the bottom, in black ink, a new line had been added. "I'm coming home." The officer beside me said nothing. His jaw clenched, his eyes darting around the room, but he didn't offer comfort. He just told me again that they would look into it. But I knew the truth. The man wasn't just breaking in. He was claiming me, piece by piece. And the worst part was, he believed it. The words on that photocopied lease haunted me. "I'm coming home." It wasn't a threat, not in the usual sense. It was worse. It was a declaration, a statement of fact, like he already believed it was true. And I couldn't escape the weight of that certainty. For the next few nights, I didn't sleep at all. I sat in the living room with every light blazing, the bat never leaving my grip, my phone clutched tight in my hand. I kept checking the windows, the doors, the yard outside. I stared at the shadows, waiting for them to move. The silence pressed in on me until it felt suffocating. Then one night, just after 2 in the morning, I heard it again. The sound of footsteps on the porch. Slow. Heavy. Measured. My chest clenched as I held my breath, the bat raised. The doorknob rattled once, twice, like fingers testing the lock. Then silence. I stood there frozen for what felt like hours. When I finally worked up the courage to look outside, the porch was empty. No figure, no movement, nothing but the faint rustle of wind through the trees. But on the ground, pressed against the door, was another photograph. I bent to pick it up, my hands shaking so hard I almost dropped it. This time, it wasn't him on my bed or me at my table. It was the house. My house. Shot from outside, every angle captured like he was surveying it. And in the window of the living room, faint but visible, was me. Sitting in the chair, the bat across my lap, staring into the dark. My breath caught in my throat. He had been there, standing outside, photographing me while I waited for him. Watching me watch for him. I slammed the door, locked it, shoved furniture against it, but it didn't matter. The damage was done. He didn't even need to come inside anymore. He was already inside my head, bending my life to his will. The next day, I took the photos, the lease, every scrap of proof I had, and went straight to the police station. I demanded to see someone higher up, someone who would listen. They took me into a small room, laid out the photos one by one, studied them carefully. For the first time, I saw unease in their eyes. But still, they had no answers. No name. No record. No reason why this man would fixate on me or my house. They told me to stay vigilant, promised to increase patrols in my area, and sent me home. Stay vigilant. As if I wasn't already living every second with my nerves on fire. That evening, I called my landlord again, desperate for answers. He swore once more that he had never rented to anyone by that name, never had a tenant like the man I described. I pushed harder, demanded old records, even threatened legal action. Finally, he admitted something that made my stomach drop. Years ago, long before he had owned the property, the house had belonged to another family. A man, his wife, their son. They had lived there for decades before selling it and moving away. The landlord didn't know their names, didn't know what had happened to them, but he said one thing that stuck in my brain like a splinter. They didn't want to leave, he said. The neighbors told me they fought about it for months. Something about the son not accepting it was over. I hung up the phone, my heart pounding. Could it be him? The son? Had he come back after all these years, unable to let go, convinced the house still belonged to him? It explained the knowledge of the quirks, the details only someone who lived there could know. It explained the fury, the certainty in his voice. But it didn't explain the photos. That night, I dreamed of him. Of waking up to find him standing over me, camera in hand, snapping picture after picture while I lay frozen. I jolted awake in a sweat, the echo of the shutter still in my ears. The next morning, I found another photograph waiting on the porch. This one was different. It wasn't of me. It wasn't of him. It was of the house, but stripped bare. The furniture gone, the walls empty, the rooms hollow. It looked staged, like a real estate listing. And scrawled across the bottom in black ink were 4 words. "You don't belong here." I dropped it, my pulse spiking, my stomach twisting in knots. My hands shook as I locked the door again, bolted the windows, but I knew it didn't matter. He didn't need to break in. He had already claimed the place in his mind, and I was just the intruder standing in the way. That night, the sounds started again. Not pounding this time. Not rattling locks. Just quiet footsteps circling the house. Slow, deliberate, patient. Around and around, as if tracing the edges of what he believed was his. I sat there with the bat, my chest tight, listening until dawn. And as the sun rose, one thought echoed louder than the fear itself. What if he was right? I don't think I'd ever felt more like a stranger in my own life than in those weeks. Every morning I woke with the same question echoing in my head. Am I living in my home, or am I squatting in someone else's? The photographs, the notes, the footsteps circling the house at night, it was all too much to chalk up to coincidence or madness. He believed this was his home, and belief alone made it real enough to destroy me. I tried to convince myself to leave. To walk away like I had before, abandon the house, pack what I could and disappear. But the thought of running again made my chest tighten. Because if I ran, I'd never stop. He would always be behind me, watching, waiting. And besides, moving hadn't saved me last time. What was to say it would now? So I stayed. The nights grew longer, heavier. I heard the circling almost every evening now, the faint crunch of footsteps in the dirt, the occasional brush of a shadow against the window. At first, I jumped at every sound, but soon it became something worse. Routine. Like part of the house itself. Like he was weaving himself into the very structure of my life, pacing the walls until I accepted his presence. One night, I snapped. I couldn't take the silence anymore, the endless waiting. I yanked the door open, bat in hand, and shouted into the darkness, "What do you want from me?" My voice cracked, but it echoed down the empty street. Silence answered. The yard was empty. No movement, no figure, nothing but the still night air. But when I turned back toward the door, I saw it. Another photograph. Propped neatly against the frame. I picked it up with trembling hands, already dreading what I would see. It was me again. Standing in the doorway with the bat raised, my face twisted in fear and rage. Taken just seconds before. My breath caught. He had been there, close enough to capture me, while I had shouted into the dark. And I hadn't seen him. I slammed the door, locked it, shoved furniture against it, my body shaking. I wanted to call the police, but what could I say? That someone had taken my picture again? That he was always a step ahead, always slipping just out of sight? The next day, I forced myself to go to work, desperate to cling to some sense of normalcy. But when I came home, there was something waiting on the kitchen table. A small stack of photographs, neatly arranged. I flipped through them one by one, my stomach lurching. Me cooking dinner. Me brushing my teeth. Me sleeping. Every part of my life, captured, catalogued, owned. Some of them I remembered clearly. Some I didn't. Some I couldn't place at all, like moments stolen from another life and handed back to me. At the bottom of the stack was a single sheet of paper. 4 words, scrawled in thick black ink. "You don't live here." My knees buckled as I dropped into a chair, my pulse roaring in my ears. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't even anger. It was just certainty. like he was stating a fact I couldn't deny. That night, I sat awake with the stack of photographs beside me, staring at them until the lines blurred. Every image proved the same thing: I was being erased. Piece by piece, moment by moment, until the house no longer belonged to me at all. And maybe, I thought in the darkest hours, maybe he was right. Maybe I was the intruder all along. When dawn came, I walked out onto the porch, the bat still in my hand, and scanned the yard. Empty, as always. But the dirt beneath the window was fresh with footprints. Dozens of them, circling, looping, never quite leaving. I stood there, trembling, and understood with a hollow certainty. He wasn't trying to drive me out. He was waiting for me to give up. By the time the last week came, I wasn't living anymore. I was existing, pacing the same floors with the bat in my hand, eating in silence, sleeping in fragments with one eye open. The house felt less like shelter and more like a cage. His presence clung to every wall, every window, every corner. I didn't even need to see him anymore to know he was there. I told myself I'd leave, that I'd pack a bag and never look back. But every time I thought about it, something inside me froze. Because what if he followed? What if he wasn't tied to the house at all, but to me? The photographs had proven he could be anywhere. Leaving might only drag the nightmare somewhere else. It was a Friday night when the end came. I was sitting in the living room, the bat across my knees, the photographs scattered on the table like evidence in a trial. My chest ached from lack of sleep, my hands trembling from exhaustion. And then I heard it. The door. Not pounding this time. Not rattling. Just the soft, deliberate click of a key turning in a lock. My throat went dry as the door eased open. He stepped inside, calm, steady, like he was walking into his own home. His hood was down this time, his face pale and drawn, eyes burning with certainty. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He just looked at me, then at the photos on the table, and said, almost gently, "You've been here long enough." I raised the bat, my arms shaking, my voice raw as I shouted for him to leave. But he didn't move. He stepped further inside, eyes fixed on mine, and laid a folder on the table. More documents, more leases, more photos. His hand lingered on them like he was presenting proof to a jury. "This is mine," he said simply. My pulse roared in my ears as I gripped the bat tighter. For a moment, I thought I might swing, that I might finally drive him out. But I froze. Because in his eyes, I saw something I hadn't seen before. Not madness. Not rage. Conviction. Pure, unshakable conviction. And conviction is a dangerous thing. Before I could move, the wail of sirens filled the night. My neighbors must have seen the door ajar, must have called for help. The man's expression didn't change. He looked at me one last time, calm and certain, then turned and walked out into the dark. The police stormed in minutes later, searching the house, combing through the documents he'd left behind. But as always, there were no answers. The papers were a mixture of real and fake, impossible to trace. The photographs were chilling, but gave no proof of when or how they'd been taken. And the man himself had vanished, swallowed by the night once again. I left the house that same night. I didn't even pack. I drove until the gas ran low, checked into a motel, and sat there staring at the ceiling until dawn. The next day, I called the landlord, told him I was done, that he could keep the deposit, the furniture, everything. I never went back. It's been months now, and I've moved again, this time to a place where no one knows me, where the locks are new and the windows face the street. But the truth is, I don't think I'll ever really leave that house behind. Sometimes I wake in the middle of the night, sure that I hear footsteps circling outside. Sometimes I find myself staring at the walls, wondering if a photograph of me exists in someone else's hands. I've tried to convince myself it's over, that he's still tied to that house, pacing its walls, waiting for the next person to move in so he can begin again. But the fear never leaves. Because belief is powerful. And he believed, with every fiber of his being, that I didn't belong. Now, every time I close my eyes, I hear his voice again. Calm. Certain. Final. This is my house.